What if everything you believed about courage was wrong? What if the greatest act of bravery didn't come from the most trained, the most prepared, or the most experienced warrior? What if it came from someone who had every reason to run, every excuse to hide, and every justification to save themselves? In 9 seconds that felt like eternity, one person's impossible choice would rewrite the rules of heroism and leave even the world's most elite soldiers questioning everything they thought they knew about what it means to be brave. This is not a story about superheroes or movie magic. This is about real blood, real fear, and real consequences. This is about the moment when ordinary becomes extraordinary, when survival instinct battles moral conviction, and when 9 seconds become the difference between life and death for people who never expected to need saving. The morning sun painted the dusty streets of Kandahar in shades of amber and gold, but Maria Santos barely noticed the beauty. She adjusted her medical bag for the 100th time and checked her watch. 7:30 a.m. In 30 minutes, she would be treating patients at the makeshift clinic in the heart of one of Afghanistan's most dangerous districts. For most people, this would be a death sentence waiting to happen. For Maria, it was just Tuesday. She had arrived in Afghanistan 6 months ago as part of Doctors Without Borders, despite every family member, friend, and colleague begging her to reconsider. At 28, Maria was already one of the most promising trauma surgeons in Chicago. She had a comfortable life, a beautiful apartment overlooking Lake Michigan, and a future that sparkled with possibilities. But something inside her refused to be satisfied with comfort while people were dying in places the world had forgotten. The locals called her Angel Maria because she seemed to appear wherever the need was greatest. What they didn't know was that Maria was running from something just as much as she was running toward something. 2 years earlier, she had lost her younger brother Carlos in a gang shooting in their old neighborhood. She had been working a comfortable shift at Northwestern Memorial Hospital while Carlos bled out in an alley just 12 miles away. The guilt ate at her like acid. She couldn't save Carlos, but maybe she could save someone else's brother, someone else's child. Maria walked through the narrow streets, her footsteps echoing off the worn brick walls. Children peeked out from doorways, their eyes following her movement. Some waved shyly. Others ran to touch her hand before darting back to safety. She had learned enough Pashto to exchange basic greetings, but her smile needed no translation. The clinic was a converted school building, with walls scarred by decades of conflict. The windows had long since been boarded up or blown out, replaced now by heavy curtains that Maria had sewn herself. Inside, the room smelled of antiseptic and hope in equal measure. Maria had spent countless hours scrubbing the floors, organizing supplies, and creating something resembling a sterile environment from almost nothing. Her translator and assistant, Ahmad, was already there when she arrived. Ahmad was 19, with intelligent eyes that had seen too much too soon. He spoke 4 languages fluently and dreamed of becoming a doctor himself someday. Maria had been secretly saving money to help him apply to medical schools in Europe or America. She saw something special in Ahmad, a determination that reminded her of herself at his age. "Good morning, Dr. Maria," Ahmad said in his careful English. "We have 12 people waiting already. 2 are children with fever. 1 old man has the chest pain and—" He hesitated, lowering his voice. "There is a woman who says she was hurt by her husband. She is very scared." Maria nodded, her expression growing serious. Domestic violence cases were always complicated here. Women often couldn't seek help openly, and their injuries had to be treated carefully to avoid making their situations worse. She had learned to document everything quietly, to provide treatment that couldn't be easily detected, and to offer information about safe houses without putting anyone at additional risk. The morning passed in a blur of patient after patient. Maria sutured a deep cut on a construction worker's hand, treated a child's infected ear, and carefully examined the woman Ahmed had mentioned. The woman's ribs were bruised but not broken. Maria prescribed pain medication disguised as vitamins and gave her a card with a safe house number written in code. The woman's grateful tears said everything that words couldn't. By noon, the temperature outside had climbed past 100 degrees. The clinic's small fans pushed the hot air around without providing much relief. Maria had shed her long-sleeved shirt and worked in just her scrubs, ignoring the disapproving looks from some of the older men. She had learned to pick her battles. Saving lives was more important than following every cultural expectation. She was cleaning a young boy's scraped knee when she heard the distant rumble of vehicles approaching. In this neighborhood, unexpected vehicle traffic usually meant trouble. Maria paused, listening carefully. The rumble grew louder and more distinct. Multiple vehicles, heavy ones, moving fast. Ahmed appeared at her side, his face tight with concern. "Dr. Maria, I think we should." The first explosion cut him off. The building shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Car alarms began wailing in the distance. Then came the sound Maria had learned to dread during her months in Afghanistan. The sharp crack of automatic weapons fire. The patients in the waiting room began to panic. Children cried. Adults shouted in Pashto, their voices overlapping in a chorus of fear. Through the curtained windows, Maria could see flashes of movement in the street, running figures. More vehicles. Ahmed grabbed her arm. "We need to get everyone to the back room. Now," but as they began herding patients toward the rear of the building, Maria heard something that made her blood freeze. Between the bursts of gunfire and the chaos in the street, she could hear a child screaming. Not screaming in fear, but screaming in pain. Pure, desperate agony. She moved toward the front window and carefully lifted the edge of the curtain. What she saw made her stomach clench. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, lay in the middle of the street about 50 yards away. Her leg was bent at an impossible angle, blood pooling beneath her. She must have been hit by shrapnel from the first explosion. Around her, a firefight was raging between insurgents who had taken cover behind overturned cars and what looked like a joint patrol of Afghan and American forces. The girl was directly in the line of fire. Maria watched in horror as bullets sparked off the pavement around the child. She was trapped in no man's land, too injured to move, too exposed to survive much longer. Both sides in the firefight had bigger concerns than one wounded civilian. In warfare, collateral damage was expected. One child's life was insignificant compared to the tactical objectives both sides were fighting for. But not to Maria. "Doctor, we have to go," Ahmad pleaded, tugging at her sleeve. "The fighting is getting closer. If we stay here, we'll all die." Maria knew he was right. The logical thing, the sensible thing, the thing that would keep her alive to help other patients another day, was to retreat to the back of the building and wait for the violence to pass. That's what any rational person would do. That's what she had been trained to do in the security briefings before her deployment. But looking at that little girl, Maria didn't see a tactical situation or an acceptable loss. She saw Carlos bleeding in an alley while his sister worked safely in a hospital miles away. She saw every patient she had ever lost, every moment when being careful and following protocol had meant standing by while someone died. The gunfire intensified. Through the chaos, she could hear American voices shouting tactical commands. Navy SEALs, from the sound of their coordination and discipline. They were advancing methodically, using standard urban warfare techniques to clear the insurgent positions. Professional, efficient, deadly. They would win this engagement. Maria was certain of that. But the little girl would be dead long before their tactical victory was complete. Maria made a decision that would haunt her dreams and change her life forever. She grabbed her medical bag and started toward the front door. "Dr. Maria, no!" Ahmed's voice cracked with desperation. "You cannot go out there. It's suicide. That little girl will die if someone doesn't help her," Maria said, her voice surprisingly calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I'm a doctor. This is what I do. The soldiers will stop the fighting eventually. We can help her then. Eventually will be too late." Maria paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "Ahmad, take care of the other patients. Get them to safety. If I don't come back," she pulled a small notebook from her pocket and handed it to him. "Everything about the safe house contacts is in here. And there's money hidden in my apartment. Enough for medical school. You'll find it taped under the kitchen sink." Ahmad's eyes filled with tears. "Doctor, please, think about this. You're no good to anyone if you're dead." Maria smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young woman who had grown up dreaming of saving lives in comfortable Chicago hospitals. Maybe not. But I'm no good to myself if I let that little girl die while I hide in here. She opened the door. The heat and noise hit her like a physical blow. Gunfire echoed off the buildings, creating a disorienting maze of sound. The smell of cordite and dust filled her nostrils. Somewhere close by, men were shouting orders in both English and Pashto. Maria stepped into the street. The moment her foot touched the pavement, everything changed. The world seemed to slow down and speed up at the same time. She could see individual bullets striking the ground near her feet, sending up small puffs of dust and concrete chips. She could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, competing with the rhythm of automatic weapons fire. From her position near the clinic door, Maria could see the full scope of the battle. 3 insurgents had taken cover behind a burned-out car about 30 yards to her left. They were firing sporadically at a squad of Navy SEALs who had established positions behind concrete barriers to her right. The SEALs were methodically advancing, using covering fire and tactical movement to close the distance. And directly between them, in the worst possible place, lay the wounded little girl. Maria started running. The first 20 yards were the longest of her life. Every step felt like it took an eternity. She could hear bullets whining past her ears, could feel the heat of near misses. Her medical bag bounced against her hip as she ran, supplies rattling inside. Halfway to the girl, someone started shouting at her, a deep American voice full of authority and disbelief. Civilian in the kill zone. Civilian in the kill zone. The firing from the SEAL positions momentarily decreased as the soldiers processed this impossible sight. A woman in medical scrubs, running directly into the crossfire, apparently intent on reaching the wounded child. But the insurgents showed no such hesitation. If anything, the appearance of an American-looking woman seemed to energize them. Their fire increased, muzzle flashes sparking from behind their cover. Maria felt something hot graze her shoulder, then her leg. She stumbled but kept running. 10 more yards, 5 more yards. She reached the little girl and immediately dropped to her knees beside her, using her own body to shield the child from the worst of the crossfire. The girl's eyes were wide with pain and terror, but she was conscious, alive. Up close, the injury looked even worse. The child's left leg was clearly broken, with what appeared to be a compound fracture. Blood was flowing steadily from multiple shrapnel wounds. Without immediate treatment, she would go into shock and die within minutes. Maria opened her medical bag and began working. Time became elastic. She was vaguely aware that the firefight continued around her, but her entire focus narrowed to the task at hand. Stop the bleeding. Stabilize the fracture. Keep the child conscious and breathing. Her hands moved with practiced precision, applying pressure dressings, starting an IV line from supplies in her bag, injecting pain medication. The little girl whispered something in Pashto that Maria didn't understand, but the tone was clear. She was asking for her mother. "Shh," Maria whispered back, stroking the child's hair while continuing to work on her injuries. "You're going to be okay. I promise you're going to be okay." She was so focused on her patient that she almost didn't notice when the gunfire around them began to change. The insurgents' fire was becoming more sporadic, less coordinated. The SEALs were gaining ground, advancing under covering fire. Then she heard footsteps running toward her position. Maria looked up to see 2 Navy SEALs approaching at a dead run, their weapons trained on potential threats, their movements fluid and professional despite the chaos around them. They slid into cover beside her and the wounded girl, using their bodies to create an additional shield. The first SEAL, a compact man with intelligent eyes visible behind his tactical goggles, immediately began scanning the area for threats, while his partner, a larger soldier with a thick beard, looked down at Maria with something approaching awe. "Ma'am, what the hell are you doing out here?" The bearded SEAL asked, his voice tight with controlled adrenaline. "My job," Maria replied without looking up from her patient. She was in the middle of securing the makeshift splint she had created for the girl's broken leg. "This child needs immediate medical attention. Ma'am, we need to get you out of here. This area is not secure." "I'm not leaving without her." Maria's voice was calm but absolutely firm. "She's lost too much blood to move safely without proper stabilization." The two SEALs exchanged a look. In their combined 22 years of military experience, neither had ever encountered anything like this. Civilians were supposed to run away from firefights, not run into them to perform field medicine on wounded children. The first SEAL spoke into his radio. "Command, this is Alpha 2. We have a civilian medical provider treating a wounded child in the middle of the engagement zone. Request immediate case-vac and medical support." The radio crackled back with a burst of static and disbelief. "Say again, Alpha 2. Did you say civilian medical provider?" Confirmed command. American female. Appears to be a doctor currently treating a wounded child under fire. She refuses to leave the patient. There was a long pause before the radio crackled again. "Alpha 2, what is your tactical assessment?" The SEAL looked at Maria, who was calmly explaining to the little girl in broken Pashto that everything would be all right while simultaneously checking her pulse and monitoring her breathing. Around them, bullets continued to spark off the pavement, but the doctor seemed completely focused on her patient. "Command, I've never seen anything like it. This woman just ran into an active firefight to save a kid. She's either completely insane or—" He paused, watching Maria gently wipe tears from the little girl's face while adjusting her IV drip. "Or she's the bravest person I've ever met." The firefight was winding down now. The insurgents, outgunned and outmaneuvered, were beginning to retreat, but Maria wasn't paying attention to the tactical situation. She was entirely focused on keeping one small child alive. "What's your name, ma'am?" the bearded SEAL asked. "Dr. Maria Santos," she replied, checking the child's pupils for signs of concussion. "I run the clinic about 50 yards back that way." "Well, Dr. Santos, I'm Chief Petty Officer Johnson, and this is Petty Officer Martinez, and I have to tell you what you just did. I've been in combat for 15 years, and I've never seen courage like that." Maria looked up at him with tired eyes. Courage had nothing to do with it. That little girl needed help, and I was the only one who could help her. That's not courage. That's just being human. But as Chief Johnson watched this small woman in blood-stained scrubs cradling a wounded child, she had risked everything to save. He knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, something that would change how he thought about bravery, about duty, about what it meant to serve others. In the distance, the sound of helicopter rotors grew louder. Medical evacuation was on the way. The little girl would live. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Chief Johnson was already composing the report he would have to write, trying to find words to describe 9 seconds of impossible courage that had rewritten everything he thought he knew about heroism. Maria Santos had come to Afghanistan to save lives. What she hadn't expected was how saving one life would transform the lives of everyone who witnessed it, including a group of elite warriors who thought they had seen everything war had to offer. But this was only the beginning of the story. The real test was yet to come. The helicopter blades created a whirlwind of dust and debris as the medical evacuation chopper settled onto a cleared patch of ground 50 meters from where Maria knelt beside the injured child. The little girl, whose name Maria had learned was Aliyah, had stabilized somewhat during the 20 minutes it took for the aircraft to arrive. Her breathing was steady, the bleeding had stopped, and the makeshift IV drip Maria had rigged was keeping her hydrated and helping to prevent shock. Chief Johnson and Petty Officer Martinez had remained beside them throughout the entire ordeal, providing cover and assistance. What had started as a routine patrol to clear insurgent activity had become something none of them would ever forget. As the Navy medics rushed toward them with a proper stretcher and advanced medical equipment, Maria felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over her. "Santos," the lead Navy medic called out as he approached. "I'm Hospital Corpsman First Class Williams. We'll take over from here." Maria carefully transferred Aliyah's care to the Navy medical team, providing a rapid but thorough report on the child's injuries and the treatment she had administered. Williams listened with professional attention, but his expression showed clear respect for the field medicine Maria had performed under impossible conditions. "You did excellent work, Doctor," Williams said as they carefully moved Aliyah onto the stretcher. "This child is alive because of what you did out here." As the medical team prepared to load Aliyah into the helicopter, the little girl reached out with a weak hand toward Maria. She whispered something in Pashto that Maria couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear in her eyes. She was saying thank you. Maria squeezed the child's hand gently. You're going to be fine, sweetheart. The doctors on the helicopter will take very good care of you. Chief Johnson stepped beside Maria as they watched the helicopter lift off, carrying Aaliyah toward the military hospital at Bagram Airfield, where she would receive surgery and advanced care. Dr. Santos, he said, his voice serious, my commanding officer is going to want to speak with you. What you did today, it's going to attract attention. Are you prepared for that? Maria wiped the sweat and dust from her face, leaving streaks in the grime. She looked exhausted but determined. I just want to get back to my clinic. I have other patients waiting. Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't think you understand what just happened here. You ran into an active combat zone, under fire, to save a wounded child. That's going to be in my report. It's going to go up the chain of command. There are going to be people who want to know more about you. The truth was that Maria didn't want attention. She had come to Afghanistan to work quietly, to help people without fanfare, and to try to find some peace with the guilt that had been eating at her since her brother's death. The last thing she wanted was to become some kind of symbol or poster child for American heroism overseas. But she also understood that her actions had consequences beyond her personal preferences. As they walked back toward her clinic, Chief Johnson explained what would happen next. There would be an official debriefing. There would be medical reports about Aaliyah's treatment. There would likely be media interest, once word got out about an American civilian doctor running into combat to save an Afghan child. When they reached the clinic, Ahmed rushed out to meet them. His relief at seeing Maria safe was evident on his face, but so was his fear about what had just happened. Dr. Maria, are you hurt? We heard the explosions and gunfire, and when you didn't come back, he stopped, looking at the blood on her scrubs and the exhaustion in her eyes. The child, is she alive? She's alive, Maria confirmed. They've taken her to Bagram for surgery. She should be fine. Ahmed nodded, but his expression remained troubled. Doctor, some of the patients left during the fighting. They were scared. But others stayed, and there are more people waiting now. Word has already begun to spread about what you did. This was exactly what Maria had been afraid of. In her experience, attention in Afghanistan could be dangerous. The more people who knew about her actions, the more likely it became that she would be seen as a target by insurgent groups who viewed American civilians as legitimate enemies. Chief Johnson seemed to read her thoughts. Santos, I think we need to discuss security arrangements for you and your clinic. Security arrangements? I've been working here for 6 months without any problems. Ma'am, that was before you became visible to everyone in this district. What you did today is going to be talked about. Stories like this spread fast in small communities. Some people will see you as a hero, but others... He left the sentence unfinished, but Maria understood the implication. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Maria returned to treating patients, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy despite the morning's events. But she could see the difference in how people looked at her. There was a new intensity in their gazes, a mixture of awe and concern that made her uncomfortable. Around mid-afternoon, a convoy of military vehicles arrived at the clinic. Maria watched through the window as several officers in Army uniforms got out, along with Chief Johnson and his SEAL team. This was clearly the official response she had been expecting. The senior officer was Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a career military doctor who served as the medical liaison for coalition forces in the region. She was a woman in her late 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes that had seen their share of war zones. When she entered the clinic, her expression was a mixture of professional curiosity and genuine respect. Dr. Santos, I'm Colonel Mitchell. I believe we need to have a conversation about this morning's events. They sat in Maria's small office, which was really just a converted classroom with a desk, 2 chairs, and medical supplies stacked against the walls. Colonel Mitchell listened carefully as Maria recounted the events of the morning, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly just taking notes. Santos, Colonel Mitchell said when Maria finished her account. What you did today was extraordinary. It was also incredibly dangerous, not just for you, but potentially for the military personnel who had to operate around your presence in the combat zone. Maria felt a flush of anger. Are you suggesting I shouldn't have tried to save that child? I'm suggesting that there are procedures and protocols that exist for good reasons. When civilians enter active combat areas, it creates complications for military operations. That little girl would have died if someone hadn't helped her immediately. Your procedures and protocols don't account for that. Colonel Mitchell studied Maria's face carefully. No, they don't. And that's exactly what makes this situation so complicated. She closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. Santos, what you did today is going to be written up as an extraordinary act of heroism. It's going to be recommended for civilian awards and recognition, but it's also going to paint a target on your back. I didn't do it for recognition. I know that. That's what makes it even more remarkable. But the reality is that your actions have created a new situation that we need to address. The local Taliban and other insurgent groups are going to view you as a high-value target now. An American doctor who embarrassed their fighters by running into their combat zone to save a child they wounded? That's not something they're going to ignore. The weight of this reality settled on Maria's shoulders like a heavy blanket. She had been so focused on saving Aaliyah that she hadn't fully considered the broader implications of her actions. "What are you recommending?" she asked quietly. "Officially, we're recommending that you accept assignment to a more secure medical facility, either at Bagram or at one of the larger forward operating bases, somewhere where we can better ensure your safety." "And unofficially?" Colonel Mitchell smiled slightly. "Unofficially, I think you're exactly the kind of person who is never going to accept that recommendation. So, unofficially, we're going to work with Doctors Without Borders to enhance security at this clinic and provide you with better communication equipment and emergency protocols." She wasn't ready to leave the clinic, wasn't ready to abandon the community that had come to depend on her services. "There's something else," Colonel Mitchell continued. "The little girl you saved, Aaliyah, she's going to need extensive rehabilitation. The surgery at Bagram went well, but she's going to require months of physical therapy and follow-up care. Her family has requested that you be involved in her ongoing treatment." "Of course," Maria said immediately. "I'll do whatever I can to help. That's going to mean regular trips to Bagram, coordination with our medical staff, and probably some media attention that you're not going to like. Are you prepared for all of that?" Maria thought about Aliyah's hand reaching out for hers as the helicopter lifted off. She thought about the trust in the child's eyes, the way she had whispered thank you in a language Maria barely understood but completely comprehended. "I'm prepared for whatever it takes to help that little girl recover." Over the following weeks, Maria's life changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The story of her rescue of Aaliyah began to spread, first through military channels and then through international media. Doctors Without Borders initially tried to keep her identity private, but in the age of social media and instant communication, anonymity was nearly impossible to maintain. The first major news story appeared in the Washington Post 3 weeks after the incident. The headline read, "American Doctor Runs into Firefight to Save Afghan Child." The article, based on interviews with the Navy SEALs who had witnessed Maria's actions, painted her as a hero who had risked everything to save an innocent life. Within days, the story had been picked up by major news networks around the world. Maria found herself receiving interview requests from CNN, BBC, ABC News, and dozens of other outlets. She declined them all, preferring to focus on her work at the clinic and Aaliyah's ongoing recovery. But the attention brought unexpected consequences. Donations began pouring into Doctors Without Borders, specifically designated for Maria's clinic. Medical supplies, funding for additional staff, and offers of support from other healthcare organizations around the world. The small converted school building that had struggled to serve the basic medical needs of the local community was suddenly receiving more resources than Maria had ever imagined possible. There were also less welcome forms of attention. Security briefings from coalition forces indicated increased chatter among insurgent groups about targeting the American Angel Doctor. Maria's daily movements had to be coordinated with military patrols, and Ahmed was assigned a radio for emergency communication with nearby military units. The most significant change, though, was in how the local community viewed her. What had started as grateful acceptance had evolved into something approaching reverence. People began traveling from neighboring districts to seek treatment at Maria's clinic. Parents brought their children not just for medical care, but to meet the doctor who had risked her life for an Afghan child. Maria found this hero worship deeply uncomfortable. She had come to Afghanistan to work quietly and heal her own emotional wounds through service to others. The spotlight felt like a distraction from the real work she wanted to do, but then she met Aaliyah's family. Aaliyah's father, Hassan, was a carpenter who had lost most of his work when the local economy collapsed under the pressure of ongoing conflict. Her mother, Fatima, had never learned to read but possessed a quiet dignity that reminded Maria of her own grandmother. They had 3 other children, all younger than Aaliyah, and the family struggled to survive on Hassan's sporadic income. When Maria first visited Aaliyah at Bagram for a follow-up appointment, she was struck by the child's resilience. Despite the trauma of her injuries and the unfamiliar environment of the military hospital, Aaliyah greeted Maria with a bright smile and a flood of Pashto that Ahmad translated as endless thanks and excitement. "She says you are her angel," Ahmad explained, smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "She says she wants to be a doctor like you when she grows up so she can help other children." The conversation with Hassan and Fatima was more complicated. Through Ahmad's translation, they expressed their gratitude but also their concern about the attention their family had received as a result of the incident. "They are worried," Ahmad explained, "that people will think they are collaborating with Americans because of what happened. They want to thank you, but they are also afraid." This was the reality that Maria had been trying to avoid. Her actions, motivated by pure humanitarian instinct, had created ripple effects that extended far beyond her original intent. Aaliyah's family was now associated with American military forces in the minds of some in their community. This could make them targets for intimidation or worse. It was Hassan who provided a solution that surprised everyone. He says, Ahmad translated, that he wants to work at your clinic. He wants to help build better facilities, to expand the buildings so you can help more people. He says if people are going to think his family is connected to Americans anyway, then he wants that connection to be about helping people. And so Maria found herself with an unexpected ally. Hassan began working at the clinic, using his carpentry skills to improve the building's infrastructure and create more treatment spaces. His presence helped bridge the cultural gap between Maria and some of the more conservative members of the community who had been suspicious of a Western woman providing medical care. Fatima also became involved, helping to organize other women in the community to support the clinic's work. She couldn't read, but she had a gift for understanding people's needs and connecting them with appropriate resources. Aaliyah herself became a regular visitor to the clinic once she was discharged from Bagram. Her recovery was progressing well, though she would always walk with a slight limp. But more importantly, she had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. Children who had been afraid to seek medical care were now brought to the clinic by parents who pointed to Aaliyah and told them that this was where hurt children got better. 3 months after the incident, Maria received a visit that would change her perspective on everything that had happened since that morning when she ran into the street to save a wounded child. Colonel Mitchell arrived at the clinic with an unusual companion, Admiral James Peterson, a senior Navy officer who oversaw special operations in the region. Admiral Peterson was a career SEAL who had risen through the ranks to become one of the most respected leaders in naval special warfare. "Dr. Santos," Admiral Peterson said when they met in Maria's office, "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did for that child. But I also wanted to tell you about something that's been happening as a result of your actions." He explained that Maria's story had spread throughout the special operations community, not just in Afghanistan but around the world. Her example of selfless courage under fire had become a case study in military leadership courses. More significantly, it had sparked conversations among combat personnel about the relationship between military objectives and humanitarian concerns. "What you did that day," Admiral Peterson continued, "reminded a lot of warriors why we're really here. It's easy to get caught up in tactics and strategy and forget that at the end of the day we're here to protect people, to save lives. You showed us what that looks like in its purest form." But the Admiral had come with more than just thanks. He had a proposal that would take Maria's mission to a level she had never considered. "Dr. Gubbartov, Santos, we want to create a new program, a formal partnership between Special Operations Forces and civilian medical personnel in conflict zones. The goal would be to better coordinate rescue and medical response operations, particularly in situations involving civilian casualties." Maria listened carefully as Admiral Peterson outlined the concept. It would involve training selected civilian medical personnel in basic tactical awareness and emergency communication procedures. In return, special operations units would receive enhanced training in medical triage and civilian protection protocols. The program would be voluntary, Colonel Mitchell added, and it would be designed to support rather than replace existing humanitarian medical operations. Think of it as a way to better prepare for situations like what happened with Aaliyah. Maria considered the proposal carefully. On one hand, it represented exactly the kind of formal military involvement that many humanitarian organizations tried to avoid. The principle of medical neutrality was fundamental to organizations like Doctors Without Borders. On the other hand, her experience with Aaliyah had shown her that sometimes the lines between military operations and humanitarian missions became blurred whether you wanted them to or not. If her actions could help save more children like Aaliyah, didn't she have an obligation to consider it? "I need to think about this," Maria said finally. "And I need to discuss it with my organization's leadership." "Of course," Admiral Peterson replied. "This isn't a decision to make lightly, but I want you to know that what you did that morning changed how a lot of people think about courage, about duty, and about what it means to serve others. That has value beyond any formal program or official recognition." As the two officers prepared to leave, Admiral Peterson paused at the door of the clinic and looked around at the converted classrooms where Maria had created something approaching a modern medical facility from almost nothing. "You know, Dr. Santos, I've led men into combat situations that most people would consider impossible. I've seen acts of heroism that defy description. But what you did that morning, running into that firefight with nothing but a medical bag and the determination to save a child's life, I've never seen anything like it, and I don't think I ever will again." After they left, Maria sat in her office contemplating the unexpected direction her life had taken. When she had come to Afghanistan, her goal had been simple: work quietly, help people in need, and try to find some measure of peace with her own demons. Instead, she had become the center of an international story about courage and heroism. Her actions had inspired military personnel, humanitarian workers, and ordinary people around the world. But more importantly, they had set in motion a series of events that were transforming the community she served. The clinic was treating more patients than ever before. Hassan's construction work had doubled the facility's capacity. Fatima had organized a network of community health workers who helped identify people in need of care and provided basic health education. Aaliyah was not only recovering from her injuries, but had become a bright, enthusiastic presence who helped other children feel comfortable seeking medical treatment. And in 9 seconds, that had felt like an eternity. Maria had discovered something about herself that she never would have known otherwise. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore logic, disregard safety, and simply do what you know is right regardless of the consequences. The story of those 9 seconds was far from over. But as Maria prepared to close the clinic for the day and make her evening rounds to check on patients, she realized that the most important part of the story wasn't what had happened in the past, but what would happen next. The real test of courage wasn't in 9 seconds of action under fire. It was in the choice to keep serving, keep helping, and keep believing that one person's actions could make a difference, even when the world seemed determined to tear itself apart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new patients, and new opportunities to serve. And Maria Santos, who had come to Afghanistan to heal others and ended up discovering her own strength, would be ready for all of it. 6 months had passed since that morning when Maria Santos ran into an active firefight to save Aaliyah's life, and the world had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The story of those 9 seconds had taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond the dusty streets of Kandahar to inspire people in places Maria had never imagined. But it was the changes close to home that mattered most to her. The clinic had grown into something extraordinary. What had started as a converted school building with basic medical supplies had become a comprehensive healthcare facility that served not just the immediate neighborhood, but communities from across the region. Hassan's construction skills, combined with the international donations that continued to pour in, had transformed the space into a modern medical center with proper surgical facilities, a pharmacy, and even a small laboratory for basic diagnostic tests. More importantly, The clinic had become a symbol of hope in a region that had known too much despair. Local healthcare workers had begun arriving from other districts to volunteer their time and learn from Maria's approach to trauma medicine. Ahmed had been accepted to a medical program in Germany, with his tuition fully funded by donations inspired by Maria's story. But he had chosen to defer his admission for 2 years to help train the new volunteer staff. Aliyah had become the unofficial mascot of the clinic. Her leg had healed well, leaving her with only a slight limp that she wore like a badge of honor. She had taught herself basic English through conversations with Maria, and had appointed herself as a translator for other children who came to the clinic. Her dream of becoming a doctor had only grown stronger, and Maria had quietly begun setting aside money for Aliyah's future education. But the most significant change was one that wouldn't be fully understood for years to come. Maria's actions that morning had sparked a movement that was transforming how military and humanitarian organizations work together in conflict zones around the world. The program that Admiral Peterson had proposed had been implemented as a pilot project in 3 different theaters of operation. Selected civilian medical personnel received training in tactical awareness and emergency communications, while Special Operations Forces learned enhanced medical triage and civilian protection protocols. The results had exceeded everyone's expectations. In Syria, a trained civilian doctor had been able to coordinate with special forces to evacuate 17 wounded civilians from a bombed hospital. In Somalia, a military medic with enhanced civilian protection training had saved an entire family by recognizing signs of malnutrition that would have been missed under traditional combat medicine protocols. The program was being expanded globally, with Maria serving as the unofficial model for the kind of courage and competence they were trying to foster. But for Maria herself, the most important change was personal. She had found peace with her brother Carlos's memory. The guilt that had driven her to Afghanistan had been transformed into something more constructive. A deep understanding that healing the world's wounds required taking personal risks, accepting uncertainty, and sometimes making choices that others might consider impossible. The morning that would change everything again started like any other. Maria was examining a young boy with a persistent cough when Ahmad rushed into the room with an expression of barely controlled excitement. "Dr. Maria," he said in careful English, "there are people here to see you. Important people. They say they have traveled very far." Through the window, Maria could see a small convoy of vehicles that looked different from the usual military patrols. These were civilian vehicles with diplomatic plates. As she watched, several people in business suits emerged, including a woman who looked familiar but whom Maria couldn't quite place. The delegation was led by Dr. Susan Chen, the Director General of the World Health Organization, accompanied by representatives from the United Nations, the International Red Cross, and several major humanitarian organizations. Maria recognized Dr. Chen from news coverage, but had never imagined she would meet her in person, much less in a clinic in Kandahar. "Dr. Santos, Dr. Bob," Chen said when they were introduced. "I apologize for arriving without advance notice, but we wanted to see your work here firsthand before making you a formal proposal." They spent the morning touring the clinic, with Maria explaining the various programs they had developed and introducing the delegation to staff members and patients. Dr. Chen and her colleagues took detailed notes and asked probing questions about everything from supply chain logistics to community engagement strategies. It was Aliyah who provided the most compelling testimony. When she learned that these visitors had come specifically to learn about the clinic, she insisted on giving them a tour in her mixture of English and Pashto, enthusiastically explaining how Dr. Maria had saved her life and how the clinic had transformed their entire community. She says, Ahmad translated as Aliyah spoke rapidly in Pashto, that before Dr. Maria came, children in this neighborhood who got hurt badly would die because their families couldn't afford to take them to the big hospital in the city. She says Dr. Maria didn't just save her life that day, she saved all the children who come here now. After the tour, Dr. Chen asked to speak with Maria privately. They sat in Maria's small office, surrounded by the medical texts and patient files that documented 18 months of work in one of the world's most challenging environments. "Dr. Santos," Dr. Chen began, "what you've accomplished here is remarkable. But we're here because we believe you could accomplish something even more significant on a global scale. She explained that the World Health Organization was launching a new initiative to address medical care in conflict zones around the world. Traditional approaches had proven inadequate for dealing with the complex challenges of providing healthcare in areas affected by warfare, terrorism, and civil unrest. "We need someone to lead this initiative," Dr. Chen continued. "Someone who understands both the medical challenges and the human complexities of working in these environments. Someone who has proven that it's possible to provide world-class medical care under impossible conditions." The position would be based in Geneva, with extensive travel to conflict zones around the world. Maria would lead a team of international medical experts in developing new protocols, training programs, and resource allocation strategies for humanitarian medical missions. "Santos, your work here in Kandahar has become a model that organizations around the world are trying to replicate. We want you to help us scale that model globally." Maria listened carefully to the proposal, asking questions about staffing, funding, and operational independence. The opportunity was extraordinary, a chance to influence medical care in conflict zones on a scale she had never imagined possible. But it would also mean leaving Kandahar, leaving the clinic she had built, leaving the community that had become her family. "I need time to think about this," Maria said finally. "Of course," Dr. Chen replied. "This isn't a decision to make lightly. But I want you to know that we believe your approach to medicine in conflict zones represents the future of humanitarian healthcare. The world needs leaders who combine medical expertise with the kind of courage you demonstrated that morning when you saved Alia's life." That evening, Maria walked through the streets of the neighborhood where she had lived and worked for the past year and a half. Children who had been patients at the clinic waved and called out greetings. Shopkeepers whose families she had treated invited her to stop for tea. Older women who had initially been suspicious of an American female doctor now smiled and nodded with genuine warmth. She stopped at the spot where she had knelt beside Aaliyah 18 months earlier. The street had been repaved and there was no visible sign of the violence that had occurred there. But Maria could still remember every detail. The sound of gunfire, the feel of Aaliyah's blood on her hands, the weight of the decision to run into danger rather than away from it. When she returned to the clinic, she found Hassan and Fatima waiting for her, with Ahmad and several other staff members. Word of the WHO delegation's visit had spread quickly through the community. "Dr. Maria," Hassan said through Ahmad's translation, "we heard that important people came to offer you a new job." Maria nodded, uncertain how to explain the complexity of the decision she was facing. "He says," Ahmad continued, "that they understand if you have to leave. You have given so much to this community, and you have your own life to think about. But he wants you to know that you will always have a family here." Fatima stepped forward and embraced Maria, whispering something in Pashto that didn't need translation. The older woman's tears said everything about what Maria's presence had meant to their community. It was Aaliyah who provided the clarity Maria needed. The next morning, Aaliyah appeared at the clinic with a drawing she had made. It showed two scenes. On one side, Dr. Maria treating patients in Kandahar. On the other side, Maria helping children in what looked like different countries around the world. She says, Ahmad translated, that she drew this after thinking about the visitors yesterday. She says she knows Dr. Maria loves the children here, but there are children in other places who need help too. She says Dr. Maria taught her that when you can help people, you have to help them, even if it's scary. Looking at the drawing, Maria realized that a 6-year-old child had understood something that had taken her days to figure out. The choice wasn't really between staying and leaving, between loyalty and opportunity. The choice was between limiting her impact to one community or expanding it to communities around the world. That afternoon, Maria called Dr. Chen to accept the position with the World Health Organization. But she also made it clear that her first priority would be ensuring the sustainability of the clinic in Kandahar. She would use her new platform to secure long-term funding and staffing for the facility. Ahmed would accelerate his medical education with WHO support so he could eventually take over clinical operations. Hassan would be hired as the clinic's facilities manager. Fatima would lead community outreach efforts, and Aaliyah would receive a full scholarship to attend international schools, with the understanding that she would return to serve her community as a doctor when her education was complete. The transition took 6 months to organize properly. During that time, Maria worked with WHO advanced teams to establish the infrastructure for the Global Conflict Zone Medical Initiative. She also spent countless hours documenting the systems and approaches they had developed in Kandahar so they could be adapted for use in other settings. The night before Maria left for Geneva, the entire community organized a farewell celebration that filled the streets around the clinic. Hundreds of people came to thank her and wish her well. But it was the presentation made by the children of the neighborhood that moved Maria most deeply. They had created a book of drawings and letters telling the story of Dr. Maria and the clinic. Each page depicted a different moment: Maria treating patients, Hassan building new rooms, Ahmad learning to be a doctor, Aliyah teaching other children not to be afraid of medical treatment. But the final page showed something Maria hadn't expected. It was a drawing of the world, with small figures representing Dr. Maria helping children in many different countries. Below the drawing, in careful English letters, Aliyah had written, "Dr. Maria's love is too big for just one place." As Maria stood before this community that had become her family, holding a book that captured their shared story, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She had come to Afghanistan running from the guilt of her brother's death. She was leaving as someone who had learned that the best way to honor the dead was to dedicate your life to protecting the living. The 9 seconds when she ran into that firefight to save Aliyah had changed more than one child's life. They had sparked a movement that was transforming how the world approached medical care in conflict zones. They had created a model for courage that was inspiring people in situations far removed from warfare. And they had proven that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore everything that tells you to be careful and simply do what you know is right. 5 years later, Dr. Maria Santos stood before the United Nations General Assembly to deliver a report on the global impact of conflict zone medical programs inspired by her work in Kandahar. The statistics were impressive: thousands of lives saved, hundreds of medical facilities established, dozens of international partnerships created between military and humanitarian organizations. But the statistic that mattered most to Maria wasn't in her formal report. It was a personal update she had received that morning from Ahmad, who was now Dr. Topi. Ahmad and was running a network of clinics across southeastern Afghanistan. Aliyah, now 11 years old, had scored at the top of her class in her international school's entrance exams. Her essay for admission had been titled, "Why I Want to Be a Doctor." In it, she had written about watching Dr. Maria run into danger to save her life, and about learning that being a doctor meant being willing to help people even when it was difficult or dangerous. "When I am a doctor," Aliyah had written, "I want to be brave, like Dr. Maria. I want to help children who are hurt and scared. I want to show them that someone cares about them enough to take risks to keep them safe." As Maria concluded her presentation to the United Nations, she thought about that morning in Kandahar when everything had changed. 9 seconds of impossible courage had become a lifetime of service, a global movement for better medical care in conflict zones, and a legacy that would continue through young people like Aliyah, who had learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they chose love over fear. The little girl whose life had been saved by an impulsive act of heroism was now preparing to save other children's lives. The woman who had run into a firefight to help one child was now helping to save thousands of children around the world. And somewhere in the space between one person's courage and its ripple effects across time and distance, the true meaning of heroism revealed itself. It wasn't about the 9 seconds of action under fire, but about the lifetime of choices to keep serving, keep helping, and keep believing that every life was worth saving, no matter what the cost. The story that had begun with a doctor running toward danger instead of away from it had become something larger than anyone could have imagined. It had become proof that in a world filled with violence and despair, the simple decision to help someone in need could change everything. 9 seconds of impossible courage had lasted a lifetime, and it would continue to inspire acts of heroism for generations to come, carried forward by everyone who had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is ignore every reason to stay safe and simply do what you know is right. The SEALs hadn't seen it coming. Neither had Maria. But once it happened, once those 9 seconds had passed, the world was forever changed by the knowledge that ordinary people were capable of extraordinary courage when it mattered most. And in the end, that was the most important lesson of all.